The machines would not stay off. In the summer of 2010, in an office in Minsk, an antivirus analyst named Sergei Ulysin was working a support ticket that made no sense. A client across the border in Iran had a rack of computers that kept restarting, not crashing once, restarting endlessly in a loop. And when the technicians wiped the machines clean and reinstalled everything from scratch, the fault came back within minutes, as if the computers were reinfecting themselves out of thin air. It was the most ordinary kind of complaint a support desk gets. A man in an office, annoyed that his equipment would not behave. The analyst pulled the suspicious files to look at them, and the first thing he noticed was the size. A typical virus of that era was 10 or 15 kilobytes, a scrap of code. This thing was 500 kilobytes, and when it unpacked itself, it swelled past a megabyte. Nobody wrote malware that big because nobody needed to. There was more machinery inside this one file than in entire criminal toolkits. Ulysin and his colleagues started reading, and the further in they went, the quieter the room must have gotten, because what they were holding was not a scrap of anything. It was the single most sophisticated piece of software ever caught in the wild, and it had been found not by a spy agency, but by a man answering a help desk call about a computer that would not turn off. To understand what they had, you have to understand what it was reaching for. Deep inside Iran, under the desert at a site called Natanz, sat the country's uranium enrichment plant. Long halls of centrifuges, tall metal cylinders spinning uranium gas at tens of thousands of revolutions a minute, thousands of them wired together in cascades. They were the beating heart of Iran's nuclear program, and they were the thing much of the world was terrified of. You could bomb them from the air, and several governments quietly wanted to. But a bombing is loud, it starts a war, and it can be rebuilt. Somebody had thought of something quieter. The centrifuges were not run by hand. They were governed by small industrial computers, the gray boxes that sit in every factory and treatment plant on Earth, the ones that open a valve, hold a pressure, keep a motor at the right speed. Made by Siemens, these particular ones, and this is the part that should stop you. A factory controller is not supposed to be a target in a war. It is plumbing. It is the least glamorous object in the building. And the weapon in Ulysin's hands had been built from the ground up to find one exact model of that plumbing in one exact plant, and to do something no piece of code had ever done before. It reached out of the digital world and put its hands on a physical machine. Here is what it did, and it is almost cruel in its patience. Once inside, the code waited and watched, learning the rhythm of the plant, sometimes for weeks. Then quietly, it began to change the speed of the centrifuges, spinning them faster than they were ever meant to turn, then slowing them, stressing the metal, working the machines toward the point where they tear themselves apart. And while it did that, it did the second thing, the thing that turns a clever attack into a nightmare. It lied to the control room. It fed the operators' screens the readings they expected to see. Normal speeds, normal pressures, green lights. So the engineers at Natanz sat in front of their monitors, watching a plant that was perfectly healthy, while a few meters away, behind the wall, their centrifuges shook themselves to death. Picture being one of those engineers. Your instruments say everything is fine. Your own eyes, your training, the numbers you have trusted your whole career, all of it says nothing is wrong. And your machines keep failing, one after another, for no reason you can find. Some of the Iranian technicians were reportedly fired over it, suspected of sabotage or incompetence. because the alternative, that the plant itself was possessed, was not something a rational person could say out loud. The genius of the weapon was not just that it broke things, it was that it made the people watching doubt themselves first. It worked. Independent analysts who studied the plant's output concluded that over a stretch of late 2009 into early 2010, Iran quietly pulled out and replaced around 1,000 centrifuges, a tenth of the ones it had spinning, far more than should ever have broken in that window. The International Nuclear Inspector's own reports began registering the damage without knowing its cause. A nuclear program that no bomb had touched was going backward, and the people running it did not yet know why. It stayed invisible for so long because it was dressed to pass. When a computer loads a piece of deep system software, it checks for a signature, a kind of wax seal that certifies this came from a company you can trust. Stuxnet carried real seals, stolen from 2 legitimate electronics firms in Taiwan, whose offices sat almost next door to one another, which means somebody very likely walked in and took them by hand. To every machine it touched, the weapon looked like ordinary trustworthy equipment software, and it was waved straight through. And to get in the door in the first place, it used not 1, but 4 separate flaws in Windows that nobody in the world knew about yet. 4 secret keys to 4 locks, each one worth a small fortune on its own, all 4 spent on a single job. A criminal who finds a flaw like that hoards it and sells it quietly. Whoever built this burned 4 of them at once, on one plant, in one desert. That fact alone told the analysts something before they understood anything else. Money was not the motive. The target was Natanz. So how did the world find out? The weapon made one mistake, and it was the only mistake that mattered. It escaped. A tool built to stay hidden inside one air-gapped plant in the desert got out, most likely carried on an engineer's laptop or a memory stick, and once it was loose, it did what code does. It spread to 100,000 computers, by some counts far more, across the whole world, machines in India and Indonesia and the United States that had nothing to do with uranium and were never the target. On all of those, the weapon was harmless. It looked at each one, checked whether it was wired to that one specific model of Siemens plumbing, found that it was not, and went dormant. But it was there, and being there, it could be found. A weapon designed to be invisible had, in the end, announced itself to the entire planet. The silence it was built for was the one thing it could not keep. That is when the second detective enters the story. A German engineer named Ralph Langner ran a small firm that did exactly the unglamorous work this weapon exploited, securing the industrial controllers that run real-world equipment. He and his team took the code apart, and where others saw an impressively complex virus, Langner saw intent. He worked out that this was not aimed at data or money or secrets. It was aimed at a machine. He was able to say out loud and in public what the target was and roughly what it was meant to do to it, and the picture he assembled was so specific, so surgical, that it pointed unavoidably at a very short list of who could possibly have built it. This took a nation-state, he said, 2 of them probably, working from the code alone, the way a pathologist works from a body. He was right. In time, the reporting caught up with the engineering. The New York Times reporter David Sanger revealed that the weapon had a name inside the 2 governments that built it. Operation Olympic Games, a joint American and Israeli program begun under one president and accelerated under the next, and that the escape into the wild had happened despite the plan, not because of it. And Iran's own president, who had spent months insisting nothing was wrong, finally admitted at a news conference that software had, in his words, created problems for a limited number of the country's centrifuges. The lie the weapon told to the screens had lasted exactly as long as it took a help desk analyst in Minsk to open a file. Now here is the postmortem, and it is not the one the builders wrote for themselves. On its own terms, the weapon was a triumph. It set back a program that frightened the world, without an airstrike, without a soldier, without a declared war. 4 separate unknown flaws in Windows strung together. Fake credentials, stolen from real companies, so the code looked trustworthy to the machines it infected. A payload that understood the physics of a centrifuge better than most engineers do. If you measure it as a weapon, it is a masterpiece. But a weapon is not only what it does to its target, it is what it teaches everyone who sees it. Before this, reaching through a computer to break a physical machine was theory, a thing security people worried about at conferences. After this, it was a proven fact, demonstrated at planetary scale, with the working blueprint spread across 100,000 hard drives for anyone patient enough to study it. The people who built it opened a door, walked through it once, and could not shut it behind them. Every attack, since that reaches past the screen to grab the pump, the valve, the motor, the actual physical thing, is walking through the same door. Which brings us to the water. In the summer of 2026, this year, the same country blamed for so much of that follow-on work was accused of reaching into the industrial controllers of American water and wastewater systems, the little gray boxes that hold the pressure and set the chemical dose in at least 7 states, with one state seeing dozens of its town water systems disrupted at once. Some plants had to rip out the automation and run the water by hand, and the technique at its core was the one born in the Iranian desert. Get into the plumbing that no one thinks of as a target, and if you can, make the screen say everything is fine. The lie that Iran's engineers watched on their monitors is now a lie an American town could watch on its own. Somebody in Minsk had to turn half a megabyte of code into plain sentences before the world could see what it was built to do. But the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.